In the summer of 1955, Walt Disney had a problem. He was a few weeks off opening his most audacious venture yet, and he had a decision to make.
Should he install flushing toilets or drinking fountains?
His plumbers had gone on strike, and there wasn't enough time to do both. This was the last thing he needed. He was heavily in debt and had decided to stake not just his reputation, but his personal fortune on building an amusement park, something which was normally free to enter.
But he needn't have worried. By combining technical wizardry with the magic of the big screen, Disney had hit upon his most consequential innovation yet, one that would transform his dwindling kingdom into a global empire.
As Disneyland celebrates its 70th birthday, this is the story of how Walt Disney combined silver screen magic with the miracle of construction to build the happiest place on Earth. At the end of World War II, Walt Disney was in a bind. His movie studio had made it through the war making propaganda films, but he was now heavily in debt, and it was beginning to seem like the glory days of Disney were in the past. But the man behind the world's most famous mouse wasn't done yet. A chance visit to a railroad fair in Chicago in 1948 sparked an interest in fairground rides. Amusement parks and fairs were nothing new at the time, but for Disney, they lacked a certain magic. Usually, they were designed around the rides, with some attention given to scene setting and decoration, but nothing resembling any kind of creative vision.
Disney wanted to create something new, a place with rides and attractions, but more than that, a place that would really tell a story. He wanted to project an image of an idyllic world, one of innocence and wholesomeness, where children could let their imaginations run free.
To get his idea off the ground, Disney called in art director Herb Ryman, and over the course of a frantic weekend in September 1953, they developed the initial concept for Disneyland. What they created was something radically different to anything that had come before. The first major difference came in the layout. When researching other parks, Disney found that one of their weaknesses was they often lacked a coherent plan, making them pretty confusing to navigate. If he were to create the happiest place on Earth, it would have to be simple to get around. And to do that, Disney had to meticulously design the flow of people as well as the attractions. And that all began at the entrance. At the time, amusement parks in the US were typically free to enter and as such had multiple entrances. Disneyland, however, would have just one. By restricting access to the park in this way, Disney was able to create a tightly curated experience from the moment guests stepped foot in his park. Visitors would be greeted by an embankment on which sat a station for a miniature railway that ran the perimeter of the entire park. This would also conceal the park's first illusion, the embankment doubling as a physical barrier to prevent the sights and sounds of the outside world from getting in. From there, they would enter the park via a tunnel, which Disney called the stage curtains, a small plaque marking the point at which guests left the real world behind and entered Disney's imagination. First stop after entering was Main Street, USA, an idealized version of the American High Street, heavily based on Disney's hometown of Marceline in Missouri. From there, the park would make use of eye-catching visual elements, which Disney would coin as weenies, to pull people around the park. The grandest of these would of course be a fantasy castle, which would draw visitors towards a central plaza, the hub from which every land, ride and attraction would radiate out. As well as making navigation easier, it would create a point at which people could meet and rest. Branching off from this were a series of themed areas. Other parks had often included novelty buildings to give a sense of the exotic, but these would be standalone features rather than part of a coherent theme. What Disney planned was total immersion. Just like the park itself, each land would be visually cut off from anything that might spoil the illusion. With the concept sketches complete, Disney sent his brother Roy off to New York to raise money for the build.
But how do you turn something this new and unique into a reality? Disney had no experience of building anything on this scale, let alone something that broke with this much precedent. He figured relying purely on imagination would get him nowhere, but engineering on its own wasn't very entertaining. He needed people who could combine artistic creativity with practical skills to create something unique. What he needed was an Imagineer.
Fortunately, Hollywood was full of them. He turned to set design as an artist in his own company, but also from a powerful rival. 20th Century Fox had a backlot 4 times the size of Disneyland, and it was filled with scenic artists used to building everything from city streets to steamboats. It was from here that Disney filled the ranks of his new army of Imagineers. The design process started with a pitch, which was then worked up into storyboards and further on into models of increasing sizes. The whole process was fluid, with constant revisions and alterations made throughout, including on some of the park's biggest structures. This is Neuschwanstein Castle in southern Germany. It was used as the inspiration for the iconic Sleeping Beauty castle, which lays at the head of the park. It has a gatehouse, turrets and palace, all of which provided a reference for Disney's version. On the front of the palace, it has a balcony which leads from the spectacular Singers' Hall. This detail was initially included in the plans, but in a sign of how fluid the development was, it was changed purely by chance. During the design phase, engineers had taken the model apart for cleaning, only to quickly reassemble it when Walt Disney came to visit. In the rush, they put the palace back on the wrong way round. Disney noticed the mistake, but actually preferred the way it looked, and had the castle built as the model stood. The balcony still lives on today, but at the back of the castle. This level of improvisation didn't stop at the design stage. The Jungle Cruise has become one of the most popular rides of Disneyland, and has since been replicated at other Disney parks. Designing a ride like this today requires months of planning and design work by huge teams of people. But back in 1954, the ride's layout was solely down to this man, legendary art director Harper Goff. With a bulldozer driver looking on, Goff took a stick and walked around the ride's plot, drawing a line in the soil. Once completed, he drew a parallel line a few meters away. The bulldozer followed, piling up the excavated soil on the embankments, and the layout of the Jungle Cruise was complete.
Now, this might all sound a bit free jazz, but there was a lot at stake. If Disney didn't pull this off, he stood to lose everything.
As Disney's ambitions for the park grew, so did the bill to pay for it all. By the time construction began, he'd taken out $17 million in loans, equivalent to over $600 million today.
He even put his personal fortune on the line, selling properties and cashing in his life insurance to raise funds. In 1954, he had the financing in place, but with so much money at stake, he needed the park earning as soon as possible. And that meant opening the gates in the lucrative vacation season the following summer.
On the 16th of July 1954, a year and a day before the grand opening, Disneyland broke ground. To supplement his crack squad of Imagineers, Disney brought in 2 crucial figures to oversee the construction: Cornelius Vanderbilt Wood and Joe Fowler. Wood was a savvy businessman with a keen eye for organisation. It was he who had found the site that Disneyland was going to be built on, 160 acres of orange and walnut groves in Anaheim, California. At the time, Anaheim was a rural farming town, but its flat land was perfect for constructing on, and access to the recently constructed freeway meant downtown Los Angeles was just 30 minutes away. Wood had previously worked at General Dynamics, training teams of people to build airplanes, and he's soon setting about organising the thousands of workers that came to this site every day. Fowler, meanwhile, was a retired admiral and a veteran of both World Wars. He'd spent the last few decades overseeing the construction of warships for the Navy. Initially, he'd been drafted in to oversee the construction of the Mark Twain steamboat, but his ability to wrangle logistics made him invaluable to the wider construction effort of the park.
Fowler's initial assessment of the plans was bleak. Of the 20 attractions due to be ready for opening day, only 6 were going to get there. 11 were doubtful, and 3 would definitely not be ready in time.
Together, Fowler and Wood adopted a strategy that prioritised the important storytelling aspects of the park, while finding ways to cut corners and find efficiencies elsewhere. Their aim wasn't perfection. Instead, they raced to get everything good enough for opening day, with a view to continue work afterwards. Handrails around planted areas were scrapped. Walnut trees felled from the site's original farm were kept, cut off at the trunk, and then replanted upside down to resemble mangrove swamps. But among the cost-saving and improvisation, there were some truly impressive innovations. Do you notice anything special about this bollard or this fence? Well, it might be that as you're walking through, you don't notice anything at all. Despite their best efforts, Disney's team wasn't able to banish the outside world completely. Things like rubbish bins and utilities weren't part of the fantasy script, but were still essential to the park. To solve this, his Imagineers created a new colour that would help unwanted features blend in with the planting scheme around the park. They named it Go Away Green. It was so successful that it's still widely used in Disney parks today and even has a successor. Things meant to blend into the sky are painted blending blue. But there was one technique Disney's Imagineers used that proved to be one of the most successful illusions of the park. Main Street USA is designed to welcome visitors into that quaint, wholesome vision of Americana. But it doesn't take long to spot the movie magic at work here. Only the ground floor of each building is occupied because the upper floors are too small. That's because the whole street uses forced perspective. The technique has long been used in Hollywood, where sets are built at distorted angles to create the illusion of depth or height in a studio. In this scene from The Blackguard, a painted backdrop creates the staircase to heaven, and shorter actors were hired to stand up the steps, furthering the illusion. Building a life-size American high street was beyond even Disney's means, but shrinking everything would just make the street look small. Instead, the buildings were constructed to a range of sizes, with ground floors built at near 1:1 scale and the first and second floors built at increasingly smaller scales. By decreasing the height of a building the higher it gets, our eyes are tricked into thinking they're further away, and we assume they're taller than they are. But the most effective use of forced perspective is on the iconic Sleeping Beauty castle. The tallest tip of the castle rises 23 metres off the ground, making it slightly taller than the White House. So big, but not a towering fortress. To make it appear bigger, like Main Street, each story is built at a slightly smaller scale. But that effect is enhanced by introducing so many disconnected elements, all of a different height. Because there are no consistent stories, our brain has less of a reference for how tall it should be, making the castle seem bigger. On July 17th, 1955, after a year of frantic construction, the moment of truth had arrived. The opening day of Disneyland.
To all who come to this happy place, welcome.
Everything had been building up to this moment. Thousands of guests were invited. A live TV broadcast was scheduled. Would this be Disney's moment of triumph? Well, no. The whole thing was a total disaster.
The park was swamped with people after thousands of counterfeit tickets were sold. Just as Joe Fowler had predicted, many of the rides weren't finished, and most of those that were ended up breaking down. A gas leak near the castle nearly burned it to the ground, and the Mark Twain almost sank with the amount of people boarding it.
Hello, Irene.
How are you? It's listening.
As for the striking plumbers, Walt had opted to finish the toilets on time rather than the drinking fountains, leading people to accuse him of a cynical ploy to buy drinks instead of providing free water. But But ultimately, none of that mattered. Just as his first cartoons had done nearly 30 years earlier, Disneyland had captured the public imagination. Work on the park went on, and over the following years, rides were continuously improved. Despite the princely entrance fee of $1 for adults and 50 cents for children, within 2 months of opening, 1 million people had visited the park. Disneyland had become so iconic that on a trip to America in 1959, the president of the USSR expressed his and his wife's disappointment that they were barred from visiting. For his part, Disney was never completely satisfied with Disneyland, and with the lessons he'd learned, he quickly turned his attention to building a bigger, better version in Florida. Walt Disney passed away before he could ever see the completion of his next creation, but Walt Disney World would prove to be one of the biggest and most sophisticated theme parks ever built.
70 years on, the rough edges of opening day are long forgotten. What endures is the blueprint that Walt created, a place built with the tools of Hollywood, the discipline of engineering, and an imagination all of his own. Disneyland didn't just revive his studio, it rewrote the playbook for how we design experiences, cities, and even entire worlds.
Don't forget that we're inspiring the next generation of builders through our investment into Brickborrow, a fantastic LEGO subscription service. You can learn more and get started today over at brickborrow.com. And as always guys, if you enjoyed this video and you want to get more from the definitive video channel for construction, make sure you're subscribed to the B1M.